What's up, guys? My name is Daniel. I draw cards and turn them into 3D prints using HueForge, and I also do HueForge tutorials for all of you. Today, we are going to do Artist Series Episode 7, and today we are going to feature the artist Pretzel Prints. She does a lot of 3D design work. She also sells filament on her website, and she does a bunch of TikTok content. So she sent me some of her drawings. She sent me a painting. We're going to work through it. This is different than what I've been doing. Typically, what I've been doing is getting digital artists' work and photographers' work and turning those into HueForge. But today we're going to take an actual physical piece of media, a picture of a physical piece of media, and then turn that into a HueForge. So we're going to get all the texture of the paper that was used and all of the strokes that were used with the colored pencils. We're going to see what happens. I hope it turns out really good, and let's get into the video. This video is sponsored by New Makers. Want to keep your 3D prints fresh and vibrant? Meet New Makers, your go-to filament for quality, color, and consistency. New Makers has a growing library of colorful 3D printing filament perfect for your next project. They offer some of the brightest colors at very affordable prices. They also have a monthly subscription service, New Box, where you'll receive 2 spools of new colors or special materials and 1 spool of their standard PLA Plus for only $39. If you're looking for quality filament on a budget, go to newmakers.com and use code NEOKOIPRINTS at checkout for 10% off your next order. So like I said, she sent me pictures of some of her actual hand-drawn art, so this is going to be very interesting whenever it prints. Let's talk about what is going to happen as far as print time is concerned. This is going to take a significant amount of time, even at 0.08 layer heights. If we drop it down to 0.04 to get a little bit more detail, it's going to take even more time just because of all the textures that we see. You can see right here, if we turn on wireframe, all of the peaks and valleys that are going to get 3D printed, that does take a significant amount of time to print. So just be aware of that if you have something that you want to turn from a drawing into a 3D print. It's just something to keep in mind when you're doing something like this process. So right off the bat, what are we going to do? We see red, gray, blue, white, and some more darker grays. So you would think that you could just bring in, like, let's right click on the image and we can find the closest red that I have in my library. You can already see that because HueForge is looking at this like this is how standard mode looks at the image, the source image. It looks at it with like a black and white filter. So it created the mesh based on your highest areas, which are your whitest areas, and then it created the darker areas and made that the lowest part of your mesh. So it's not looking at color at all. And that's important to know whenever you're first getting into HueForge, that it's not going to just, you can't just throw colors into HueForge and expect them to be exactly where you want them to be. You have to do a little bit of work, and that is okay. We're going to work through this, and you can see that when we bring in this blue, it just doesn't go where you want it to go. Now, don't get me wrong, like, this looks pretty cool. You could totally print this out. There's no problem with that. And that's one of the reasons why HueForge is like an artist tool rather than an imagery creator, is that you can get different style results with the same kind of image. You can change the way a base image feels and looks just with simply changing colors like this. So now, how do I want to approach this? The way that I would approach this typically is, if the iris was not blue, then we could just go into color pop because most of this image is grayscale with just this red. And we might even be able to do that now. I'm not sure how well it's going to turn out. But so when I say color pop's a mode that takes into consideration one color, so like your red areas here, and all of your grayscale area, and it makes 2 separate HueForges and then stacks those together. So you can see here in our color core, this midline, that is the actual separation of the 2 HueForges. So that's why I say I think that if this iris wasn't blue, then we could probably use this pretty easily. I'm not saying that we can't. I'm still going to try to, because I love using color pop. It's definitely one of my favorite modes within HueForge. So let's go ahead and we'll bring up black. We'll bring red up top. I'm going to hit Control on my keyboard and I can grab one of the filaments from down here. I'll bring this all the way down. I'm going to grab the white. So remember, I said that this is 2 HueForges that we're stacking on top of each other. So you need your darkest, which would be black, all the way to your lightest, which would be white, and everything in between. So I set it up to where we have basically 2 different HueForges worth of colors. So if we come up on black, you can see that we have some weird artifacting going on up top. That means that HueForge is having an issue trying to figure out what exactly is grayscale and what exactly is red. You can also see it down here. Now, remember, I'm not going to really worry about the blue of the iris. If I wanted to worry about this, then I would have to use something like color match, but that makes this project significantly more complicated when it doesn't necessarily need to be. So for this particular case, we're just going to use red and grays. So when you have this kind of artifacting and color pop, there are two reasons for it. Either one, it's just a really bad quality image. We can see here that it's not. Or two, we have a tolerance slider. Now the tolerance slider is how basically the tolerance for how it's going to define grayscale versus color. You can see as we increase our tolerance, HueForge can now pick up, you know, where the reds and where the grays are of this image. And you can already see that we have a great result. I can even come up a little bit more. You can see this peak here, these little peaks here. So if we come up just a little more, that got rid of all of that. So very simple image to get through. I think that we don't have to just stick with black and white for the bottom most. I think that we could actually bring in like a higher TD gray to give it a little bit more blending for the paper. But outside of that, like realistically, this image is pretty much done, I would say. So if we bring in our gray, we can bring down the black. Let me see. There we go. So I like where this is at. I really think that this looks great. The only thing is that this white is not actually in my library. I don't have Polylight white. So if we go over to, I want to say that I have a decent white. Yeah, Bamboo Labs basic jade white at a 5.7 TD. That brings things around. So now you're looking at this and you're probably thinking there isn't much texture to it. But again, if we turn on wireframe, you can see that there's still a bunch of like peaks and valleys in this. So whenever it actually prints, we'll be able to feel all of that. Just because it looks like it doesn't have it doesn't mean it's not there. Because HueForge is directly taking what it sees in this image and turning it into the mesh. So we're gonna print this one out for sure. I think this one looks great. So let's talk about, again, this is two HueForges stacked together. So if we zoom in, you can see that the red areas are going to be taller. You can also see some of these spikes happening, and that's probably due to just brush strokes. Pencil strokes, I guess, would be the appropriate term here. So with these spikes, I don't necessarily want those printed. Most of the time, the slicer is pretty good about knocking the top off of these little tiny ones here, but these can be kind of, it can still kind of print these. So if we wanted to, we can just use spike removal down here to clean it up. And there we go. So we will definitely go ahead and print this and we will get on to the second image. Okay, so this is image number 2. As you can see, we've got a little bit of green, a little bit of blue, a little bit of red, and then some brown as well as grayscale. Something to keep in mind, again, the HueForge is an artist tool, right? Like you don't have to use what colors you see in the image. You definitely can, but it's going to be a lot more challenging as far as your filaments are concerned. That's usually the limiting factor as far as how accurate you can get colors in HueForge. So just with that in mind, I just wanted to say that like we could totally do this in grayscale, and I think it looks amazing. And I didn't really have to do any work for this. So just keep that in mind whenever you're messing around with HueForge. So for this one, we're gonna go into color match. Now color match, we have a mesh core and a color core. The mesh core, we are literally building the mesh. Like you saw in image 1 where HueForge was kind of doing all the work for the mesh as far as dividing up 2 different HueForges and stacking those together. In this color match, we now have all of the control as far as how the mesh is going to look. So I can control where this brown is going to be, if it's going to be all the way at the top of the 3D print or if it's going to be all the way down in the bottom. I can control, you know, where different colors are going on in the print itself. So that's where knowing what your background and knowing what your foreground is super important. With this image, not necessarily as important as other images, but just something to keep in mind. So we're going to turn off all of these filaments. We're going to start from scratch. So I see this blue. I see our grayscale. I see this darker brown, and I see this green. Now, this picture in particular is a little bit dark. So what we can do to brighten this up is I can actually click edit image up here at the top, and we can bring brightness adjust up so that now it's just a little bit brighter. It makes it a little bit easier to see and for HueForge to pick up on certain colors to make this mesh. If you didn't want to do that for some reason, you could totally, brighten this image up in an image editor. But that's just a handy little feature if you click edit image. So I'm going to start off with grayscale down low, and we're going to need this black. So I'm just going to leave that ticked on. And then we are going to need this more brown. We're going to need this white. I guess this off color eggshell white would be the background. That would make sense. I'm going to hold control and then scroll up on my mouse wheel, and that'll move everything above whichever slider I am on. So let's grab there we go. This is going to be an interesting thing to bring up. Instead of me going through and grabbing every single white that we see in the background, what we can do is we can actually drag in the lightest and the darkest of these whites, and we can change the TD of this fake filament. Whenever I'm dragging filament, or whenever I'm dragging colors from the actual source image, I'm holding control on my keyboard and then grabbing a color. This is a fake filament, and you can tell which ones are fake filaments by the marker here looks different than this. This at 12 is black. This is, if you hover over it, you can see it's polylight black, and it looks like a house. That's how you determine if it's a real filament or not. When you hover over a fake filament, all it gives you is the hex code of the color of the filament, the fake filament, and the TD of it. The reason that there are two different is because you don't want to go messing with the TD of your actual filaments. You only want to mess with the TD of your fake filaments. That way it doesn't mess with like the TD in your library. So rather than me going through and picking out all of these different whites, we are going to, let's just turn this off. We're going to bring, did I turn the wrong one off? I did. Let's turn off 7. Okay, so this is the lightest white. We can hit T on our keyboard, and that'll enter the mode where we can start scrolling up on our mouse wheel and adjusting the TD. So it's making this fake filament more transparent. Why do we want to do that? It's so that we get all of the blending range in between this darker gray and this lighter gray. And we might even want to grab an even more saturated, and then we can hit T again, and we can bring it back down just a hair. There we go. So now we're at a 3 TD, and we get all of this blending range from dark gray, mid gray to light gray. So it's better to do it that way when you're trying to blend colors on your mesh core rather than trying to grab out each individual filament. The next thing that we're going to do, so we already have our browns. We're going to grab some of the blues. We might not actually need that black right now. So let's do the same thing for the blues. I'm just going to bring all of these grays up. So again, we'll grab the darkest blue that we see here. So now that all looks good. You can see that we have all these blue pitting areas. What's happening is this gray is sitting on top. So like blue's going to print first because it's here in our mesh. And then we have the grays on top of it. So HueForge is showing us what the edges of these prints are going to look like. This is a lot more exaggerated than what it actually looks like in person when you print it. So just keep that in mind whenever we're working in color match. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn on fast spike removal. That seems to help a lot when you're doing color match to just go ahead and put it into spike removal. So highly recommend doing that out of the gate. We're going to grab this lighter area and we're going to hit T. So as you can see, we're starting to run out of room on our mesh core. What we can do is we can increase the thickness of our HueForge by increasing our max depth. If we want to increase our max depth, let's just say that we'll increase it to 3 millimeters. That gives us a lot more room up top now, so we can blend if we need to. Right now, I'm just giving myself more room just in case. I'm not necessarily saying that we need it yet, but we're definitely running out of space. So next we got to work on the eyes. Super simple. Again, we'll just bring in some green. Try to get as much of that as we can. I'm going to bring that green all the way up to the top, and we can change that if we need to. And then we will grab the red and bring that up just above the red. That way we can get the blending effect from the red up into the white areas. So I don't have to, again, grab all of those colors. So if we zoom out, it looks pretty close. I think that the reason that we're having issues down here is because we don't have any like true white, true gray areas. So I think the best course of action for this would be to disable. And we're disabling these two layers so that HueForge doesn't directly match to these two colors. I don't want it to match these colors. What we're doing is we're using this as a blending range. It makes a smoother transitional area for the irises, but we don't necessarily want it. We don't want this exact color being matched in HueForge, right? And you saw that when we had it not disabled, it creates these peaks and valleys. And the way you disable layers is you just click on where you want to disable and you hit D. I think they were pretty good as far as the mesh is concerned. If there are any little tweaks that I need to make, we can definitely do that. You can see that we have all these spikes. So if we turn on moderate spike removal, we can get rid of all those. So we are pretty much on point when it comes to the match. Now let's go over to color core, and we're going to actually start adding filaments to this. So when you're in color match, you can either use real filaments all the way, or you can use fake filaments and then try to match them the best that you can. Either way is fine. Either way works. I've got this. I think I have a blue that matches. It's like a light blue, yeah. So we'll bring up a light blue. Bring this gray down. What did we set this TD to? A 3? I know I've got Bamboo Lab Basic, gray, blue-gray. Doesn't look like I have a gray. Oh, I do. Okay, so bring this in. It's a little dark for what I want, I think. Let's bring in a white then. We can bring in this Sunblue matte white. Turn off this black. And then we can bring back that Sunblue matte. I'll just use the regular gray down low to get some of that depth out of it. And I think I have like a khaki color from New Makers that would probably work perfectly right around here. We don't need much of it, so I use chrominal brown up top, which we might be able to change if we need to. Let's actually change the orientation of these. Yeah, let's use a deeper brown. That is not the brown I'm looking for. There we go. So that makes it a little bit more saturated. And then we can use wine red. For the red, that makes the red really pop. We can use another white here to get that blending in the eyes. And then we need, I think I have olive green. We will probably print this one out. I'm not sure yet. But I think that overall this looks really good. So anyways, let's go ahead and we will get into the third and final image and we will wrap this up. Again, huge shout out to Pretzel Prints for letting me work with her artwork. This is going to be a HueForge all about compromises. There's so many blends here of colors that it's going to be very difficult to get it 100% correct. So let's go ahead and we'll get into it and I'll show you what I mean. This one for sure is color match. There's no other mode could even get close to accomplishing this particular HueForge. So we're going to bring in our darkest greens that we see here. This is the background, so we're going to start with that. And then we will bring in our lightest green just above that. So we had to bring up that dark green up above our min depth. You can see here it's at 0.56. That's why it wasn't showing up whenever we had it down below, because it was right at 0.48. So we'll bring this green up just a hair. We're gonna hit T on our keyboard and we're gonna make that blend a little bit smoother. We can see that this is more of like a blue-green. I'm not sure if we bring in and then if we hit T on our keyboard again, and then we have an even lighter green, we'll hit T on our keyboard and get some softer, smoother blends. So there we go. So that is our entire background. And you can see like this is already taking up a good portion of our mesh. So this one's going to have to be a little bit thicker if we want all of the colors. So I'm just going to go ahead and put it up to a 4 just to give us a lot of blending. So that made it 4 millimeters thick. Maybe not that thick, but we'll, once we add colors to it, we'll see how thick it is, because right now we're on dynamic depth while we're making this mesh. Anyways, with all of the painted colors, there's a lot of smooth blending in HueForge and 3D printing in general. Smooth blending is very, very difficult. You can accomplish it with higher TD filaments, and when I say higher TD, I mean anything from like a 6.5 and up. Those are your more transparent filaments. You can kind of get some good results there. That it just requires us stacking them in an orientation that makes sense. So like we'd have to stack all the warm colors close to each other. We have to stack all of the cool colors next to each other, and we can go ahead and start on that. For the skull, I'm going to put the teeth all the way on top. We're going to try to just work our way through each of these blends. We're gonna try our best. So let's grab, I'm gonna start off with this deep red, and I'm also gonna bring in this yellow above it. And then what I'm gonna end up doing, we'll bring in this yellow as well. What I'm gonna end up doing is turning off this white, and we're going to adjust the TDs of these yellows rather than trying to yank this orange. If the orange doesn't come through, then the orange doesn't come through, and we have to bring it in. But it should. So you can see as I'm adjusting the TD, again, you hit T on your keyboard and then you scroll up. You can adjust the fake TDs of your filaments. And you can see that we just got all of the blending that we needed out of this. So that takes care of all of our warm areas. Again, you wouldn't want to mix in like a red, or not a red. You wouldn't want to mix in like a purple or a blue somewhere in between this. Remember how I said that in color match you want to turn on spike removal? Yeah, we're going to turn on some spike removal. That way we can get rid of those areas. Now, the reason that I have this is because in the actual image, we have this bright line. And we might be able to bring that home with adding some more colors down into the green background part of this color space. So we will play with that in a little bit. So now we're going to work on our blue areas. And you can see the blue's pretty much taken care of once I pulled in that blue. So I'm going to bring in this like pink and this purple. Let me grab a darker portion of this. Again, we're going to do some soft blends. So we'll hit T on our keyboard, bring up the TD of these fake colors. That way we have smoother transitions. I'm wondering why, well, I guess we do have blue here. I was wondering why we were having issues here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control on my keyboard and scroll up from the blue, and that brings everything above the blue, and everything above it up at the same time. We'll bring in this brown. We'll probably actually bring it down below the red, just to, because I think that makes more sense. And then we can hit T on our keyboard, give us some blending room for the brown. We can mix that in. Now, whether or not I actually have these colors in these higher TDs, we're going to find out. But I think that we're going to have to make some compromises on colors. But remember, right now, we're just creating the actual mesh for this. We're not, these aren't the actual filaments that we're going to add to it. So yeah, that's very important to remember here. But that's starting to look pretty good. Now you can see what's happening is we have 4 millimeters of print here. So it's going to make it a little bit thicker, which is fine. There was no other real way of accomplishing this unless we brought the layer height down to 0.04, but then we increased print time by a significant amount. And I want to see how this looks when it's really thick, to be honest. So far, this looks pretty good. It looks pretty on point. You can see the yellow in the teeth, but in the actual image, these do definitely look yellowish green. So let's work on getting this dark area. You can see that it's actually a dark area here, and that shouldn't be too bad of an issue. Perfecto. Now you can see that we have this little spike and this little spike. I'm not going to worry too much about that because at that point we're just fighting the image. So as far as everything's concerned, you got to remember this is 3D printing we're doing here. This is kind of crazy that we can get this kind of a result out of, a HueForge. I want it to have these big stair steps. This one, yes, we want smooth transitions, but we want those smooth transitions in these different color spaces, not necessarily going from color space to color space. Now, you could totally make it from color space to color space, just based on the way that you want to do the mesh. But for me personally, for this image, it looks really good. So let's go ahead and we're going to come over to Color Core, and we're going to start assigning filaments. Now, it's going to be very difficult, like I said, to actually get on point. Like to get it as close as possible, it's going to be very challenging. But we will do our best. So I've got some blue green. We can probably leave black on for down low. Let's go ahead and so we have that blue green. Might be able to turn off black. Let's see what that looks like. So if we bring this in down low, bring this up to about here. Do we have a more? No, I guess not. Let's see what grass green looks like. You're going to find that green is one of the harder colors to find as far as filaments are concerned when you start doing HueForge. There just aren't that many good greens. Let's bring in this teal and see what kind of blends we can get from. There we go. That looks pretty good. Just leave this off. Sort sliders, get it out of the way. You can either use the sliders down here, which are probably going away in the next update, or you can use the color core in the center to play around with filaments. I'm just so used to using color sliders, so I continually come down here. It's muscle memory at this point, but I definitely recommend messing around with them in the color core. That forest green looks pretty good. So if we do forest green and then we put like fluorescent green on top, we can get kind of a blend. But it looks it's a pretty stark difference between this blue to this green. But I think that might be one of the compromises we have to make. So we'll come back to green. We'll come back to green. So let's go ahead and we're going to grab a brown. Let's just use this rust copper as a placeholder for now. And is this also a 1 TD? Yes. So let's grab chocolate brown. Bring this up. Let me get nuclear red. I want to say that this was this is a higher TD. So let's go ahead and look up. Let's look up what reds we have. I have Sunloo's cherry red or Overture's red. Is right at a 4.5, so we'll just bring that over. I don't know what color to call this. I think it's more of like the olive green that I have. That looks pretty close. So we can use that here. And then we've got this yellow. This looks like a Sunlu yellow that I have. Their meta yellow. Yeah, their meta Sunlu. Meta lemon yellow by Sunlu. There we go. And then we can start working with blues. Blues I have chrominal HueForge, chrominal HueForge. I have chrominal filament. If you want to go pick up some chrominal for yourself, there's 5 different colors, 2 grays that are like higher TDs, a dark green, a dark blue, and a brown that are higher TDs that you can't typically find. So they are specific for HueForge. Let's grab. I'm gonna use muted blue for right now. And I think that looks pretty good. We should have a purple. Yeah, muted purple looks pretty close to this. The problem is with muted purple is that it's a really low TD, so we don't get like super good blending. We do have celestial purple, and it shows a little bit more detail. So for me personally, I want the colors to pop. It's also got pretty glitter in it, so who doesn't want to use that? If we're gonna do that, then we need to bring like, I don't know, like lilac purple on top of that. And then we'll use a really low TD gray. Yeah, we need to use we might actually just use a white. I have polyterra cotton white. And that brightens that up. Again, the story of this is compromises. If you have an image that is this complicated, do not think that you are just going to be able to throw it into HueForge and get a great result. You saw that we had to thicken this HueForge up to get a bunch of the blending room that we needed. We were able to play around with it a little bit to get more or less blends. Now, if I come to the side and I have a particular image, if you have one at home and you're watching this, and maybe you want the red up top. Maybe that makes sense to you looking at this image. To me, this looks like it's in the deepest part of the background. That's perfectly fine. You can move all of these areas up, and that'll print this up taller. And then you can move the purples down. So then you can swap places with this. So now the peaks would be this, and this would be the valleys. So just remember that. You have full control over your mesh core with color match, which is why it's such a powerful mode, especially for people that have been doing HueForge as long as I have. It's the way to go when you're trying to do more complicated HueForges. So bear with me. When I come back, we will have the actual physical prints. So with that, we are done with this episode of the artist series. I really appreciate Pretzel Prints for letting me use her artwork for this episode. Now, I did 3 prints. Typically, I do 2 prints, but since we talked about standard versus color pop in the beginning, I wanted to show what it would look like with color pop versus what it would look like with standard. You still get really great results with standard, but obviously if you want more color accurate, you can also use color pop and other modes within HueForge to get those really great results. So I just wanted to show that off for this particular episode. And then here is the hourglass print. This came out really good as well. The browns, we could have used a different brown to get a different color of wood for the hourglass, but outside of that, it came out really good. Now, if you are a digital artist or a photographer and would like to be featured on the artist series showing how I can turn your stuff into 3D prints, I would love to have you. So please reach out to me. I have my email in my link tree. And with that, I hope you learned something.